Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ad America. I am Andrea, one of the e-guides here, and I hope everyone is doing well today. If you're new here, Ad America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. And our event for today is Intensive Academic Writing, Master the Basics with Top Professors. But before we jump into today's event, I would like to ask a little trivia question. What percentage of academic written work may be similar to other sources before it is suspected as plagiarism? Is it A, 20%, B, 25%, C, 50%, or D, 75%? You can submit your answers to our social media platforms, and if you are able to answer correctly, you will be receiving a shout out later in the end of the event. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our facilitator for today, Dr. Siti Kusujiarti, Professor of Sociology at Warren Wilson College, and our co-facilitator, Dr. Harnika Tekaningsih, Lecturer at University of Indonesia. To our facilitator and co-facilitator, the time is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. Just to say hi, my name is Siti Kusujiarti. Should I go ahead and share my screen or?
Yeah, I think that would do. I will just say hi to later on, and I think you could start with your presentation, Professor Siti. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Harney, if you would like to say something first before I share my PowerPoint, that will be great as well.
Yeah. Okay. So while waiting for you uploading your PPT on the screen, I would like to greet to everyone who is here. This is, I think, the session 9 of the long intensive academic writing focus. This is a good series, and if you are junior academic, if you're interested in pursuing research further, I think this is the place. And today we have Professor Siti Kusujarti, who will be sharing with us her experience and especially her expertise in academic writing. And I'm going to add a little bit on that. So basically, today is Professor Siti or Ibu Siti's stage. So we're looking forward to what you're going to share in Ibu Siti.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harney. So I'll share my screen right now. Let's see. Okay. Is it the full screen already now, or?
No, I think this is oh yeah, now this is a full screen.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, well, let us start then. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. So this session is focusing on how to write journal articles. So I will be just explaining and describing the main elements that we need to think about before we write an article. So before I discuss each of the elements in detail, this is the outline of my presentation today. So the first thing I would like to discuss is what kind of factors that we need to consider when we try to write the journal article. And then knowing the journal, what kind of informations that we need to know about the journal before we write the articles. And then thesis statement. I think this is very important because especially I feel like in Indonesia, thesis statement sometimes is overlooked. And then abstract, what needs to be included in the abstracts and what kind of things that we need to take into account to write a good abstract. And then introductory sections, how we write introductions, and then literature review, and research ethics. This is because sometimes in Indonesia, this element hasn't been considered that much, and we do not, or in Indonesia, universities usually do not have embedded structure to facilitate this process. While here in the US, I'm in the US, that structure is embedded within the context of university structures. And then how we organize our results and findings in the articles, and then, of course, conclusions and direction for future research. Okay, so let us start with what kind of factors that we need to consider before we actually start writing the journal articles. So first of all, of course, we need to know the focus and the goal of our writing. So we need to have a very clear focus and goal. So then we can write a good thesis statement. The thesis statement is basically the focus and describing our main arguments in connections to the subject or in connections to the topics that we are writing. And then the third element is, of course, knowing our audience. So we should know what kind of audience that this journal is having, whether the audience is mostly practitioner, or are they mostly academicians, or are they mostly a kind of policymakers or so on. So we need to take that into account very seriously. The fourth element, this is very, very important actually. Trying to explain the connections between our research or our topic and the existing research theories, debates, disagreements, controversies related to the topic. So that way, then we will be able to position ourselves within the context of these debates, disagreements, and controversies. Where is, where our positions in these debates, disagreements, and controversies, so that it will be clear for the audience where our positions and our arguments is within this context. And clear logical structures and clear interconnections of different sections. So each of the sections has to be connected very clearly within our articles. Okay, so I mentioned that we need to know the journal very well. So the first step that we need to do is to check and understand the guideline for the author. Why this is very important? Because in the guideline, we will know how many words we have to include in our articles, because sometimes it ranges from like 7,000 words to 11,000, or some journals have shorter versions, like summary versions and longer versions, for example, right? And then also citation style and the format of the abstract. You know, certain journals have very specific format for the abstracts. So we really have to follow the guideline very closely. And then also submission process. You know, some journal or most journals actually have very clear submission process that we need to follow. And the second is we need to check the focus, the goals of the journals, whether it's international journals, whether it is focusing on more regional areas such as Asia or Southeast Asia or Indonesia, because knowing that, then we will be able to provide the right formatting or right ways of delivering our ideas. For example, I see a lot of authors from Indonesia assume that the audience know certain abbreviation like BPJS, for example, right? But if you're writing for an international journals where the audience do not really know the context of that policy, then you need to explain what that is, right? So uh, certain abbreviations, certain terms that you think are common and everybody knows might not be the case. So knowing the scope of the journals will give us ideas on what kind of information is needed. Another thing is we need to know what is the focus of the journal. In I'm a sociologist, and some journals focus more on certain theoretical perspectives or methodological perspectives. For example, if a journal focuses more on quantitative methods, then we should not submit an article that use qualitative methods. Or if certain journal uh, focus on feminist or certain feminist theoretical approach, for example, then we need to take that into account. Knowing the journal editorial boards, their background, their disciplines, where they come from, that will be important as well, so that we know, what their interests are. And again, this might be connected to the focus of the journal. Checking past articles to know and to understand more of the common themes, common theoretical, methodological, and disciplinary background of the journal. So that again, when we write our article, we can position ourselves within the context of the existing themes, theories, methodology, and other factors. Another aspects that we need to know is the peer review process, how long it will take, how they will do that. Is it a double blind review? Is it an open access journal? And whether they require IRB approval. I'm going to talk more about what IRB is, and whether they require us to also submit the data. Some journals have requirements that we actually also submit our raw data as well, or at least show them where the data are, right? So it depends on the journal, and it depends on the disciplinary background connected to the journal. Okay, so again, I mentioned before that thesis statement is very important, and sometimes in Indonesia, because I've been working with a lot of colleagues in Indonesia in supporting them in writing journal articles, and one of the challenges that they face is usually either there's no clear thesis statement, or the thesis statement is actually not there at all, right? So, and also thesis statement has to be put in the beginning of our article, so that audience know what kind of focus, what kind of arguments that we want to have in these articles. And this also tells the readers about our opinions, our point of view, and our interpretations of the subject under the discussions in the articles. So it also indicates the directions that we will take in our article by stating the main points. So thesis statements is basically our main points, our main arguments, our claims about the topic. And this claim might be disputed by others, which is fine, but that's part of the goal of writing an article is um, to have this statement, to have these main points that might be disputed. So because of that, we need to have very strong foundations, very strong background, and very strong reasons why we take the positions in the thesis statements. So, well, but this thesis statement is not just a debate. It has to have analytical point. Because in most cases, especially in my disciplines, we have to go beyond just the descriptions. We need to be critical and analytical in our articles. So thesis statement is usually put at the end of the introductory part of our article. So again, it is early in the article and it has to be clear and put quite early in the article so that the audience know about our main point. Well, before we talk about introductions, I would like to talk about abstract first. As you know, abstract is usually the part that the readers will read first before they actually read the whole articles. And reviewers usually also read the abstract first before they continue reading the whole article. So abstract is very important because it is basically the face of our article, right? So having a very good abstract is very important because if our abstract is not interesting, is not good, then people may decide not to read our article, or for reviewers they might be just rejected our article. So abstract is basically a short summary of our research, of our article. And if it is done well, it makes the reader want to learn more about your research, about your writing. So again, it needs to be interesting, but short, but sweet. It needs to be orderly, succinct, and concrete. We need to usually use active verbs instead of passive voice. That's one of the challenges that we tend to have, is the use of too many passive voices in our sentences, so that our agency is missing there. Because why we need to use active voice is because this is our ideas. We have to be responsible instead of somebody is stating this, right? Abstract, depending on the journal, abstract usually is between 200 to 300 words. But again, this is why we need to check the guideline for the author, because there they usually clearly explain how long the abstract should be. So take a look at the guideline and then check, how long the abstract has to be. And what needs to be included in the abstract? of course, the first elements is the objectives, the core issues, the research questions that we need to set forward in our articles. So the objective has to be clear. Our research questions, what kind of questions we want to answer in the articles need to be very clear as well, and how we will answer these questions. And methods, what kind of methods we use, and why we use that methods. And again, this may be different from disciplinary background to depending on your disciplinary background, the methods might be different. But the main point is that you need to be clear about what kind of methods you are using in collecting the information, in collecting the data. And then the main theories. Again, abstract should be concise, so you don't have to explain all of the theories, but just the main theories that is directly connected, or that are directly connected with the results and your main arguments, right? So and then of course conclusions, your main interpretations, your main findings, and the implications of the finding for the larger context, and also for the problems or gap that you identify in your research, right? Okay, so after the abstract, of course, we need to have an introductory part. It doesn't have to be called introduction. You can call it differently depending on the structure of your article, but introduction should establish the problems that lead to the study you want to focus. And one of the main things that you need to include in the introductions is reviewing the general trend in the literature, or the general trend in the topic that you are focusing on. And also, this is very important. The third point here is identifying deficiency in the literature, or the gap in the literature, and how you fill this gap, right? So you will be able to argue that your research or your article is important because it helps to fill the gaps. It helps to address the deficiencies in the literatures or in the research that have been conducted by others, right? So that is also connected to the significance of the research. That's why you can argue that this research is important because it helps clarify, it helps to fill the gap left by other research, or left by the existing theories. And then that will lead us to state our thesis statement that I mentioned before. So the thesis statement is connected to the problems existed in the field, or in the literature, or in the theories, or in the methodological realms connected to the topic, right? So again, as I mentioned, thesis statement needs to be included at the end of the introductory part. But before you state your thesis statement, you need to explain why that thesis statement is important, right? So again, explaining the deficiency and gap in the literature, in the research, in the theories, or in the methodology is very important here. So we need to explain that, and we need to demonstrate that we understand, the field very well. we cannot just say, oh, there's no other research addressing this topic, and without having very extensive research, because right away, reviewers will say that no, it's wrong because there have been a lot of other research addressing this. So you need to be clear, and you need to make sure that the deficiencies or the gap actually exist, right? You cannot just claim that there's a gap or there's a deficiency without any evidence. So you need to show that there is actually a deficiency, and and you're familiar with the debates in the topic. So deficiency or gap can be very specific, like, there's no other research that focus on certain group or populations or site, or, certain voices have been missing in the existing discussions, or there's a need for replications, or there's a need to use different theories and methods to explain your topic, right? So a lot of my writing, for example, is arguing that there is voices, or there are voices that have been underrepresented or that have not been heard in connections to the topic, because these populations are marginalized, right, in terms of their ethnicity, in terms of their gender identities, and so on. So but again, you need to have clear background on that arguments. Okay, so literature review. I think it's very important to have very strong literature review. One of the problems I see when I review Indonesian journal articles are that people tend to just put, a lot of references, a lot of resources, without clearly connecting those references with your arguments. So the literatures, the references you use have to be connected with your thesis statement, have to be connected with your main arguments. You cannot just, use certain literature just to show that, look, I have 100 references, so, I know a lot. No, you need to demonstrate that the literature provide foundations to answer your research questions, to answer the arguments, to answer the points that you have in the thesis statement. You need to use the literatures to locate your research so that you create connections between your own research and other research that have been done in the topic. You also use the literature to justify your project, to justify your arguments, and to demonstrate the link to the theories. And again, these literatures have to help you in answering your main research questions and explain, why you have certain arguments and why you use certain research designs and methods, and also certain analytical positions that you have. Okay, so I just would like to provide an example of how we build our arguments, right? So you probably don't have time to read this very carefully, but this is an example of an article focusing on the impact of the use of social media on the academic performance of students in the tertiary educational setting, right? So the author is arguing, or first of all, they show that, well, there have been other studies that address these issues, that other studies and findings have discussed the connections between the use of social media and students' academic performance, right? And a lot of studies state that there is a kind of negative implications of the use of social media on students' academic performance. However, these authors argue that, well, we need to look further at these connections between social media or the use of social media and academic performance of the students. We need to look at, how these connections happen and, why there is that relationships between the use of social media and academic performance. So this, again, provide a kind of foundations to build the arguments that the author is going to focus and on that topic, but also position themselves within the context of the existing research, right? And also the importance of looking more deeply into this into the results of other studies. So they argue that, well, maybe it's not just the connections, but the more important thing is to look at why is there, and what kind of factors that influence that. So, this author also mentioned that, well, maybe it depends on how they use social media, right? And it's not just that anybody who use social media will have or will receive a negative impact on their academic performance, but it depends on how they use it, right? So yeah, so this is just an example. So again, you need to only include the debate that is relevant. Good literature review show um, uh, the text you have mentioned in relations to the broad topic, as well as showing the readers that you have surveyed much of the appropriate literature, right? But again, it's not just putting all of the literatures, you have to show the connections, your own positions within the context of the literatures, so that, if there are debates, disagreements, controversies, you can identify those and position yourself within the context of those existing, disagreements, agreements, and controversies, and why you position yourself that way. And of course, literature review also serve to answer your main research questions. Okay, methods. Again, it depends on the disciplinary background. In my discipline, which is sociology, the method section is very important because it describes the steps taken in performing the research. It explains, the reasoning behind the choice of certain methods. For example, if I use survey, if I use observations, I have to explain why I use those and what the implications of the use of those methods. The locations and positionality. Well, in my discipline, positionality is important. Positionality is our own positions, my identities, my gender identity, my class identities, and my other identities, and how that may affect my findings and of course, how we analyze the data, what kind of, if you use certain software, if you use certain methods in analyzing the data, you need to explain that. And ethical aspect as well. A lot of journals now require us to have this statement about the ethical aspect of our research. And of course, we need to also connect it back with our research question. I'm going to talk more about ethical aspect a little bit later, but well, right now. But again, the ethics in research is very important. Um, One of the things that we need to ensure in doing our research is ensuring uh, our moral commitment on doing uh, ethical process, both in the field research, if you're doing a field research, but also in the process of working in writing these articles. We need to prevent scientific misconduct and research fraud, plagiarism, and also consent from the participants. And we also need to consider power relations involved in research. Because, for example, as somebody who is connected to a university, if I do a research in a certain village where people think that I have higher positions, they might feel that they cannot reject from participating in my research just because they see me as having certain power, right? So we need to take that into account because um, we need to be clear that their participation is voluntary. We we are not supposed to create pressure in any form for them to consent to participate in our research. So research participation has to be voluntary. And to make sure that they voluntarily participate in our research, we need to provide information, what the research is about, what the consequences of their participations, and also how do we protect certain confidentiality of the informations if this may jeopardize them, because if they reveal something like corruptions or uh, certain misconduct by others, for example, that may create a lot of risk for them. And how can we protect them from getting any harm? So, do no harm is one of the principles of doing ethical research. So, we really need to put ourselves in their shoes and protect them. So what we need to do, especially here, we usually have to have written informed consent, but it can also be done verbally as well. But the informed consent should be written in appropriate language, or should be said and expressed in appropriate language, understandable for the subject. Again, sensitive power relations, psychological, physical, and cultural consequences of the research, especially if we are doing research with underage populations, children under 18 years old, right? We need to be very careful, and also populations that are vulnerable, such as those who do not have power, those who have some kind of mental disabilities, or and certain conditions that may obstruct their ability to provide consent, right? And we also need to answer all of the questions they may have and provide information about ourselves. And if they need to contact us after we do the field research, then we need to provide our contact information. So again, I mentioned earlier about IRB, or Institutional Review Board. All of the universities here have IRB. So before I do any research, I have to get approval from IRB to ensure that I will be doing an ethical research. Well, I realized that this is not something that most universities in Indonesia have, even though it seems like, now they start thinking about it. But, if you don't have this, you need to think of, certain office or certain committee that you may need to contact to get this kind of approval, right? Because here it's just embedded in the university structures. Everybody who wants to do research with human subjects, right? Well, if you don't use human subjects, then you can be exempted from the review from IRB. But if you use human subjects in your research, then you need to your research has to be reviewed by IRB before you can do your research. So, and then finally, presenting your findings, of course, is very important. Depending on the methods you use, you may present your findings differently. You can, use tables, you can use, words, but analytical point is very important within these sections, right? You need to provide clear connections between the existing literatures and your findings, and how your findings help uh, filling up the gap that you mentioned in the introductions and help answer your research questions, of course. And conclusions, of course, it needs to also be short. Look at the bigger pictures, the connections between your finding and the bigger implications of your findings in terms of policies, in terms of future research, and also the contributions to the existing debates and disagreements and controversies that you mentioned in the sections before. Okay, those are the main topics that I would like to share with you, and of course, I will be happy to answer your questions after Dr. Harni present her presentations. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ibu Siti. Those are so terrific. And I think you have walked us through the nooks and crannies of preparing an article to be submitted, really. So I'm going to jump in and share my screen. So basically, it's complementary to what Ibu Siti has delivered to us. Yeah, so I'm going to share. I hope you could see all now. So I'm just going to give title as a co-facilitator for today's, just a little bit of notes to highlight the importance of what Ibu Siti has delivered to us. So you could consider it as a summary before we move into question and answer and a little bit of discussion today, yeah? Okay, so let's have a look at the big picture of an article. So if we want to writing up an article, we'll see some peripheral core and other peripheral elements of an article. So we've got the title, which means what is it about? So title should be attractive, appealing, and informative. But then we also move on to the abstract, which means what is the study in a nutshell? So Ibu Siti mentioned that abstract should be the face of the article. It should be appealing, should be a little bit spicy perhaps and sweet. That's what I remember. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I use the right metaphor. So it has to be it has to be informative. It should tell what your study is about, but it also needs to be appealing. So this is a study in a nutshell. So you could use that kind of question, a probing question, when you want to write up an abstract. Then we could move on to the core, or the part of the core part of the article. When we think about introduction, think about why is the study done. So Ibu Siti mentioned about the kind of conversation, if it is a debate within a field, what are you going to oppose, or what are you going to agree? Or is it something to do with complementing an existing study or something else? But really the big question is, why is the study done? And in the literature review, you need to mention what have other studies said about the topic in the area that you are writing. So you need to understand that you're entering a conversation, but you also need to mention important important research reports, for example, important findings, and what other people in that field talked about. So you are entering a dialogue, and you want to show what kind of reading that you have done, and so that you could position your own research. When we move on to method, you think about how was the study conducted, really. And this is also important. I think one of my supervisors told me about working on method section. Think about, when you're writing up a method section, think about how other will see how your research is done, so that when they want to replicate, they could do exactly the same, or when they want to modify, they could see, or they could do which part of your research you want to modify. When we discuss results, we talk about what the results and what do the results mean. So don't just describing what the results, but you also need to interpret those results. So what do the results mean? When we move on to conclusions, you need to highlight what is the main finding and contribution of your study. So that's the conclusion is pretty short, but you need to be sharp in that area. You need to answer the research questions or highlight the kind of research objective that you have achieved in your writing, also the kind of contribution or significance of the study. Then we also move on to references, which means that we need to highlight which studies that have been referred to. And sometimes it also includes acknowledgement, kind of probably you receive grant or support, that would be the part that you need to mention. Yeah. So in relation to data, we've got ethics that has been discussed by Ibu Siti. So yes, some universities now have been having this body of ethics committee. So that when we are dealing with human participants, we need to use ethics consent form. We need to be approved before we go on into research. So if your research involves human participants, you need to obtain consent forms. Some university who do not have a similar type of review board, they could request a letter of permission and drawing and write up their own consent forms. So basically, your university knows the kind of research you're doing, and it will not aim to do any harm. But consent form from participants are important, because sometimes journals would request you to prove that you have indeed obtained consent forms from the participants. But other than that, if your data include digital or printed data, you need to check the terms, conditions, and the copyrights used, because sometimes you need to show that you're doing, even though its data are not human participants, there are some sort of copyrights tied up with that data, and you may not be able to use that, or you need to modify the kind of presentation or visualization of that data to be presented. So we need to be careful on that. So basically, this is something that we need to think about whenever we want to draw data for our research. Okay, so just a little bit of steps. So this is actually quite concise, but think about when you want to publish an article, when you are preparing article, I think it is important to firstly choose or read few articles from the target journal. You need to familiarize yourself with the kind of publication they're accepting. So published articles would be a good example. I think this was highlighted too by Ibu Siti. And once you chose few articles, you can scan the organization of the articles and see how each of the section is written. You could also evaluate the structure of the articles if there are some similarities in terms of method or in terms of the kind of research objective, that would be your guidelines actually. That could be your model text whenever you're writing up for that journal. And in each section, you go into more detail. Have a look at how the language used in each section of that article, because as I highlighted before, each section has its own function. And whenever the function is realized, then you will need to see how language is used in each section. So just a little bit of tips, perhaps you want to examine the language demands. Have a look at how evaluative wordings are used. Is it common to use first person? And if it's tenses or other kind of modalities are used there. Some journals would require you to use past tenses instead of present tenses. So that's something that you could see in the model text or the model articles that you read. And also have a look at the logical connections, the use of, like however, nevertheless, that would be different in each of the section. So Ibu Siti is a sociologist and I'm a linguist, so I can't stand thinking about, using the kind of language used in each of the section. So just a little bit of complementarity in that area. So I think examining language demands in each section of the model text you are using for your before submission is important. So you could, really see and you could really meet the requirement, not just the amount of words, but the kind of style and language that is used in that particular journal for publication. Yeah. So now I think it's time for us to have a discussion. I know that there are some questions already in the chat box, so I'm going to stop share and we can start the discussion and ask more questions to Ibu Siti. Yeah. Okay, so let's have the first question from Ibu Ningsi Sepniar Lumban Toruan. Ibu Siti, can you show us which statement is descriptive and which one is critical? It is hard to know the difference sometimes. Yes, that's important, Ibu Siti. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. Very interesting. Yes, as I mentioned, it is, especially in my discipline, being critical is very important instead of just describing. So describing is just, tell people about what is going on, right? So if I would like to describe gender relation, well, my main areas of interest is gender relations, right? So if you just want to describe gender relations among Indonesians, then you just tell them, what happened in the context of gender relations, for example, in Japanese society, right? So just describing it. But if you do a critical analysis, then you go a step further to some extent, right? Not only talking about how people interact between different gender, but also why they do that, and what the implications of that kind of interactions, right? So that will be more of critical analysis. So, for example, in one of my articles, I first trying to address, that there have been a lot of research on gender relations among Japanese. However, there is no agreement about the positions of women within the context of that gender relations. Some would say that, women actually have higher positions compared to other societies, but some others said no, women do not have better positions. So then I position myself within the context of that debate by critically analyzing, gender relations within the context of that debates and argue that, it depends on the setting we are talking about. maybe within the context of familial settings, women have a lot more roles. But in the public settings, they have more limited roles, right? So that is a kind of critical analysis. And then I explain why I have that kind of arguments instead of just, okay, well, there is a gender division of labor in the society. Women do this, men do this, and they usually um, uh, do it in both familial context and public context. So that is just a description. But if you want to provide an analytical part, then you need to go further than that. So I hope that that is answering your questions.
Well, I think so. Maybe I just got a little bit of add a little bit of point, perhaps, Ibu Siti, because when we write, we tend to want to describe whatever we could see in the data. So we've got this habit of describing everything, but then we forgot to involve criticality, the so what that I would say something. Would that be correct if I say, when we already describe it, we need to ask ourselves, so what? What does this mean? Something like that, perhaps, Ibu Siti? Or then we could
Yes.
answer the why. Yeah?
Yes, exactly. That's a very good summary of that. And also, I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have, or we tend to have, is critical analysis, right? So instead of just accepting what other people have said, then we need to explain and to critically analyze that. And your point about so what and why, right, is very important there in providing that critical analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, because sometimes when we review articles and we are drowned with a lot of descriptions, good, beautiful descriptions, but we don't know where the writer stands. So what does those description mean? Does it mean you want to argue, you want to oppose, you want to add on this conversation? So I think one important aspect from what Ibu Sit has mentioned is that a critical analysis would involve, so what with those description? Why it is important? And it is the job of the writer to convince reviewers or readers in general to think about that this description matters. What you could synthesize from those description to be part of the big conversation in the research area. So I hope that answer Ibu Ningsih's questions, yeah? What the differences between description and critical analysis. And those are important, really, especially if you were, writing in the writing up stage. And we have more questions that I would like to raise here from Mario. Thanks for the great explanation of the research components, Ibu Siti. I would agree with that. And I would like to ask a question, which would be, could you explain the difference between research gap and phenomena gap?
Okay, well, thank you so much. Well, the main thing on the research gap is reviewing the existing research, right? And by reviewing the existing research, then you can figure out the gap in the existing research. So if I would like to talk about, again, well, my other research is on gender relations in disaster and climate change, right? So I review the existing research on that topic and then argue that, even though there are so many research on gender and disaster and gender and climate change, but there's no research that create the link between gender relations, disaster, and climate change. So after I review the findings of other research, then I find that there's a gap there, that most of the research just focus on either disaster or climate change. but not both, right? So that is the gap that I try to fill within the context of existing research. Well, the phenomena gap, I'm not really clear, and I didn't mention about phenomena gap, but um, I think it's more of the phenomena that hasn't, or the phenomenon that has not been addressed by others. And if there is like what I mentioned before, if other research hasn't been addressing a phenomenon on disaster gender in Indonesia, then there might be a need to focus on that phenomenon, right? So well, I would say that they are both interconnected, because the research is usually based on certain phenomena, right? We don't do research without having certain phenomena. So the phenomena is usually the focus of the research, and then we explain the phenomena in our research by referring to the existing research and identifying the gap in the existing research. I guess that's the connections, between those two. I'm not sure if I answer the questions, but let me know if you have any further questions on this.
Yeah. Okay. So, Pak Mario, if you have further question to add on that research gap versus phenomenon gap, feel free to add in the chat box. But I agree. I think I'm more familiar, at least in my field, with research gap. With phenomenon gap, I think we are dealing with phenomenon. So, social scientists and working in humanities and arts, I think we are dealing with phenomenon, and of course there are gaps. But what is it to do with research gap? I think that it's more to do with the writing in itself. So we are looking for something that hasn't been done in that research, or that is not being paid attention on that particular area of research. Then that's what we call this gap. So when we write an article, we want to make sure that this is a worthy kind of reading, worthy kind of research, and because we are filling in the gap, not just the gap, but we are trying to tackle a sort of phenomenon that has been going on but hasn't been paid attention. So it might be about that. Speaking of your research areas, now that you mentioned more about gender relation, disaster, and climate change, I should be interested in reading more later on, maybe after the show, Ibu Siti.
Thank you.
Yeah. So okay, we've got next questions from Ibu Malinda. Okay, so bagaimana jika review penelitian yang dilakukan tidak mendukung hasil penelitian? So, is it okay to search new research that support our finding, or what should we do? Thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, very interesting questions. So, well, first of all, we need to make sure that we review all of the relevant existing journals or research connected to our topic. So, because sometimes we may overlook certain findings or certain articles. So that will be the first step. The second step is, well, if we really don't find anything that support our research results or findings, then that is actually good. It means that we will be able to fill the gap in the existing literature, right? So that is very important. But again, we need to make sure that there is indeed no other research, no other findings that support our findings. So, well, if you find something that may be closely connected to your findings, you might want to mention that, other researchers actually show different results on the topic, but I disagree with that or something like that, right? So it's not a problem if you do not really find anything that support your findings. You just have to make sure that there's no real other research that support your findings. Second of all, try to explain why, right? Why your findings do not support the existing results of other research, right? So that is also very important, right? Maybe because you use different methods, maybe because you focus on different populations, maybe you're using different theories, right? Well, that's the point, right? That means that you fill the gap uh, in the topic, and that is actually good if you don't find anything that is similar to your findings. So we do not just have to follow other people's arguments. That's the thing as well. Um, we need to be brave. We should not just follow existing arguments, existing theories, as long as we have strong foundations for that. So that's the key. That's another, I think, challenge of many of us, especially in Indonesia, because we tend to just follow others. We tend to agree with others, uh, but instead, within the context of writing journal articles, we need to be brave. We need to set our thesis statement clearly that might be different from others. That's okay. That's the point, right? As long as you know why you have different findings, why you have um, different results of your research. That is actually good, and it means that you are being innovative. It means that you offer new ideas, right? So don't be afraid of having that, different points, different statements, and disagree with others.
Yeah. Yeah, Ibu Siti, I completely agree with you. There's this sense of fear if we have different results that it may mean we antagonize the entire field, which is quite untrue, I think, because when we write an article, we are actually entering debate. We walk on our own. If we have solid research, solid method, we should not be afraid of presenting what the results are. And it might be important because it's part of the conversation. Yeah. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's, I don't know, internal personal affair, but I think it's important what you said, being brave to present what we found in the research, be, our findings, because it's backed up with solid research and solid method, then we should not be afraid. So yeah, maybe we need to learn a little bit more how to be brave and present whatever the results is without being scared in any way. Okay, so hopefully that answers Ibu Malinda's question. We've got further questions from Bapak Dimas. Dear Dr. Siri, how hard it is to conduct social humanities research in terms of the hesitancy from the sample? Any tips on how to convince the potential sample to be willing to participate? So, wow, this is about convincing and being voluntary. What will be your answer, Dr. Siti?
Yes, that is a very interesting questions, because sometimes there's a thin line between, like putting a kind of pressure
Yes.
To the participants.
Mhm.
Again, maybe because of our positionality, our certain social status, and making sure that they actually voluntarily participate.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I've been doing is actually getting to know them well, right? So when I do research, I don't just do research for the sake of research, right? So this is an ethical aspect as well, but it's usually not included in the formal IRB procedures. That I do research for what? Is it just to publish in a journal article so that I get promotions for my own benefits? No. I usually do research because I feel that the research will be beneficial, not just for me, but for my participants, for my subject as well. So there is that important aspect in research, which is power relations in research, right? And this is very important within the context of ethical research. We need to take that into account. We need to treat I don't even call you, so I don't even call them as participants. I call them as subjects because they're human beings, right? They're subjects, have their own positionality, they have their own interests, and so on. So we need to meet where they are, right? So we need to see what kind of interest they have so that our research is not just an empty research. And this is also very important in writing the results as well, because if we just do research for the sake of research, for the sake of publications, for the sake of getting points and so on, then our research will be empty, right? So the same thing when we are approaching our subjects, we approach them as human beings, get to know them. I usually do a lot of participant observations, right? I usually live with them. I usually, not live with them literally, but like in the village, for example, I would stay there for quite long time, right? So that they get to know me. They also deserve to know me as the researchers. So that way, then we create that human relations, rapport, right? It's very important. So that they trust us, but don't abuse that trust, right? That is also very important. So, so once we get to know them and they know us, then we have to be more open about our goals of doing research. For me, again, my research, I want to think that my research will serve certain purpose, not just for me, but also for the communities. I do a lot of community engaged research, which is basically engaging the communities within the process of the research, and also this is quite challenging because I have to be open to actually change my research design depending on the situations in the field, right? So if I got certain input feedback from the participants or subjects, then I have to be willing to actually shift, my perspectives, because again, usually one of my goals in doing research is to amplify their voice, right? Instead of me just presenting the result, and so that I can be, I can have publications in Q1 or Q2 or stuff like that. So by having this, human to human relationships, then we will be able to get to know them, and also to ensure that they are actually willing to participate. And we need to be open about what the implications for them are, in participating in this research, right? Because that's part of the consent form, right? We need to include that in the informed consent. So informed consent is consisted of, first, the goal or the main topic of the research, what kind of involvement that we are asking them to have, like For example, if I will do interview, how long the interview will be, how I will be doing the interview. Am I going to record the interview? Recording. We need to have permissions to record the interview. Make sure that they know that we will record the interview, and make sure if they want us to omit certain part of the interview or not to record certain parts of the interview, let them know that, so that they can tell us, well, don't record this, and we need to respect that, right? So, and then we also need to mention about the consequences, the risk and advantages of participating in the research, and then how we will present the results, what the consequences are, and the confidentiality, anonymity of the informations and their identifications. Do we want to use pseudonyms or not a real name? If they don't want us to use that, then we should not use their real names. And in most cases, IRB would require us to actually use pseudonyms instead of real names to protect them, right? And in some cases, I don't even use the real name of the village, right? So that people cannot find them and maybe do any harm to the people there, right? So a lot of elements in terms of making sure that their participation is really voluntary.
Yeah. Oh, what you just mentioned here is very important. It's about a degree of respect that we treat our subjects or participants for our research as as humane as possible, and make clear that they could actually participate, and that would be what would be their position, what we want to gain from them. And I think that's very important. Yeah. So maybe all participants here can listen to what Siti has just mentioned. There's a certain degree of respect that we should present to the subjects that we are working with, as well as we need to make sure what kind of intention, what kind of data we are trying to gain. And I think that's a good principle of the do no harm. And well, when we see the article, it's a bit stiff because you have introduction, it has method, but beyond that, we as a researcher, we need to get a lot of steps to get trust, to give respect, and I think that's important. Yeah. So I hope that would answer the questions from Bapak Dimas. Yeah. I think it's a very useful information. I think we also have question from Bapak Abdul Basir Hamidi. Yes, thank you for your presentation. Please speak about references section. Which citation style is common in journals, and which citation style do you suggest? The other question is about the acknowledgement. Some journals put that section in the beginning of the article or maybe between the abstract and introduction. Would you please also talk about the position of acknowledgement section?
Okay, thank you so much. In terms of citation style, it depends on the journal. That's why I suggest in the beginning that we need to read clearly the guideline for the author, because in that guideline, they usually also mention citation style. So make sure that we follow whichever citation style that they require us to use. So before we even write our article, we need to check that first. So then, when we write, we use the proper citation style, because it also depends on the disciplinary background of the journal, right? In my discipline, sociology, we have our own citation style based on American Sociological Association citation style, which is very similar to APA. But again, if I publish in more like humanities journals or journals more connected to global studies, then their citation style requirement might be different. So first of all, check, that guideline for the author so that we know what kind of citation style is required for that particular journal. Acknowledgement, Buharni maybe is more familiar with that because in most of international journal that I'm familiar with, acknowledgement is usually put at the very end of the articles. Well, some journals do want us to state clearly connected to the what do you call it, conflict of interest, right? They want to know who provides the funding for our research, right? Because they would like to know whether, for example, if my research is funded by certain companies, right, then the positions of that companies might influence my research because of the pressure, economic pressure, ideological pressure of that funders, right? So certain journals want us to clearly, sometimes they have a form we have to fill out that state whether we have any conflict of interest, related to certain, issues. Because again, if my research is funded by certain think tank, for example, in the US, there are lots of think tanks that have certain ideological, strand. So that may influence, my research. So that is very important, and that's why journals want us to be open about that, right? But it's usually at the end. But again, we may also mention that in the method sections as well. So that's where we can mention that. So it also depends on, again, the requirements of the journal, because some journal would have a kind of separate form that we actually have to fill out in relations to this. So yeah, that's from me. Maybe
I agree. I usually put the acknowledgement section, at least as far as the publication that I dealt with are concerned. They usually put acknowledgement at the end, like before or after references. But check on the target journal you're going to publish and published articles in that journal that would give you information where is it actually placed. But I think you don't need to worry much about that, because there's a late stage of formatting, layouting, and editing at the end of the stage, and then you will be guided where to place those acknowledgement. So maybe we could worry more onto the content of the writing, because that's a bit more technical. But it's usually at the end. I think we're up to one last questions before the session. Yeah, but please remind me to the Committee at America. So one last question from Ibu Aisha Alma. Thank you so much, Ibu Siti and Ibu Harni, for the insightful sharing. Well, thank you. I want to ask about research topic. Which one is better? Research topic that focuses on endemic issues or national issues, or international issues related to our willingness to publish our journal in Q1. I work in health science, especially biomedical science. Maybe it's quite different with your field, but I hope to get an insight based on your point of view. Yeah. What do you think, Ibu Siti?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, well, first of all, I think it depends on the journal that you want to publish your article in, what kind of scope they have. So again, this is why it is important to not only check the guideline for the author, but as Buharni also suggested, is to read several articles published in that journal so that you know the focus, the scope of that journal, whether that journal focuses more on the national issues or international issues. Well, Q1 journal is usually having again also certain topics that they want to um, focus on. So make sure that you check that journal, check the existing articles in that journal, and see what kind of scopes they have. Even I would say that even if you focus on the national issues, I would say that connecting that national issue with the broader global issues will be also useful. I think one of the challenges I see that many Indonesians have is focus too specifically on Indonesia, right? Without connecting that with at least regional issues or even global issues. Because, sadly, to be honest, not a lot of people know a lot about Indonesia. So if I know this because even when I teach, I have to explain to them, where Indonesia is, and so so. But again, it depends on the type of journal you are publishing in, right? If that journal is focusing on Southeast Asia, most people probably are familiar with Indonesia. But if that journal, is more general, um, then we need to make that connections. Well, also in terms of showing or demonstrating the relevance of our research, we probably should provide that connections with global issues as well, so that we can argue that, well, even though we find these results in Indonesia, you know in the literature review, you should mention about other research that have been done in other countries and in other settings as well, and to what extent that your results may be connected to those settings as well, so that also broaden your audience. So I mentioned about audience, right? So that will broaden your audience, and that will increase the possibility of the audience to be able to connect with your articles, and also for the reviewers, right? It depends on the journals. Many reviewers might not be familiar with Indonesia either. So, if you do not, show that connections with a larger context, then they might feel like, well, this article is not that relevant. So, um, well, you are in biomedical science, which again, yeah, it is different. But maybe when we talk about COVID-19 and the pandemics, what happened in Indonesia is also closely connected to what happened globally as well, right? We live in a very globalized world right now, in terms of, health issues and other issues. So I think making that connections with a larger setting and context will be useful.
Yeah. All right. So I think that sum up whatever what the question has been addressed. So good. It's always good to check the published articles in the target journal. You see the trend, the kind of trends that the kind of context, the kind of countries, or the kind of fields that they're familiar with. So I think that would be one short answer to answer all your questions related to the publication. So we are nearing the end of the session, and I would like to invite Dr. Siti to give a closing remark before I give to our host, Andrea. So, Ibu Siti, screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Ibu Harni. This is an honor to share my perspectives and experience here with you all. And please, do not hesitate to contact me if you have any further questions. I share my PowerPoint presentations with the organizer. You might want to contact them if you would like to have, access to my PowerPoint. And one of the things I would like to share with you is that do not get discouraged when you receive rejections from journals, right? It's part of the process, and even if they reject our article, it doesn't mean that that is the end of it, because they usually give us very useful feedback. Good journal usually provide, or they invite good reviewers, and the reviewers usually provide very useful feedback for us, so that feedbacks are useful for us to actually improve our writing, and then we can resend it to the journals, right, or to other journals. So first of all, don't give up, if, or don't get discouraged if you receive any, rejections or major revisions. That's part of the process, and that's how we connect with other people working in the field. And second of all, again, I think ethical aspect is very important. Our commitment to the subjects, to the participants, to the communities that we work with is also very important. I would suggest that we should not just do research for the sake of research, but also think about the implications of the research, right? So that will create research that will be more useful rather than just fulfilling certain requirements or formal requirements. So again, I hope we will be able to continue these conversations, and we will be able to learn from each other. I'm also still learning. There's never ending, limit for learning process. So I also learn a lot from you all. So thank you, and I would like to thank Ibu Harni for facilitating this sections as well, and for the organizer for creating this space for us to meet together. Thanks.
Thank you for the positive message. We've got wonderful facilitator, Ibu Siti, and we've got engaging audience, as well as resulting in a very productive session, I believe. So thank you so much for everyone here. And I would like to give it back to Andrea, our host. Thank you, and bye-bye. See you in another session.
Okay, thank you so much for our audience who have participated today. I hope you gain a lot of knowledge from today's session. I would also like to thank our facilitator and co-facilitator today for sharing with us your knowledge. Earlier, before this event, we asked our audience a trivia question. What percentage of academic written work may be similar to other sources before it is suspected as plagiarism? And the answer is B, 25%. Shoutout goes to JV Jusvita from Instagram for answering the question correctly. And thank you for everyone else who have participated. Now, you might be wondering, how can I contribute an awesome event idea for Ad America? It is very easy. All you have to do is go to our website at www.adamerica.or.id, then select create an event and collaborate with us. All event proposals will be reviewed, and your event might be featured with us soon. All right, I think that is. Also, don't forget to follow our social media accounts. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at AT America. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and newsletter for more updates from us. All right, with that, I think it is time to say goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for participating in our event. I am Andrea, and see you at the next At America event.